this lesson, we're taking a look at pattern 2 of the minor pentatonic scale. Just like in the previous video for pattern 1, we're going to go in depth, so we're going to take a look at the scale shape, the intervals, including the root note locations, we're going to look at the finger options, the string bending options, and learn a lick in this pattern so you can instantly use it in a musical context. This is part of my Minor Pentatonic series, which you can access via the link in the description. In the first lesson, I covered a bunch of theory and terminology surrounding this scale, so do check that out if you haven't already, as well as the video for pattern 1, because it does make a little bit more sense to learn them in order. You'll also find a link to my Patreon page where you can download related resources such as diagrams, tabs, and backing tracks to help you practice the stuff that we're covering in these lessons. But for now, it's time to dive in and take a look at pattern 2. So the first thing you should notice about this pattern is that it's not as immediately friendly as pattern 1, but a big part of the journey is exploring the nuance of each pattern and finding new ways to create licks and melodies. Now the first new element that I want to introduce is the fact that the lowest root note is now found on the D string rather than on the bottom string. And I also want to explain that I think when you're practicing a scale cycle, starting from the lowest root note rather than just necessarily the lowest note in the scale is best, because a scale sounds a certain way because of the relationship of all the other notes to the root note. So if you're practicing a scale in isolation, starting from a note that isn't the root, then you're not quite hearing it in the most ideal way. For example, if I start pattern 2 from just the physically lowest note, it actually ends up with quite a major kind of sound. It feels much more like it resolves to that major chord. But remember, our goal here is to create a minor pentatonic scale. So in that sense, we would have actually failed to do that. Whereas if I start with the proper minor root, it has a much more appropriate minor kind of sound to it, so I think it's much better to practice that way from the lowest root note rather than the lowest note in pitch. So to find the lowest root note in pattern 2, what we can do is use the octave shape from the root note on the bottom string. So once again, we're going to be in the key of A, so we're going to be learning an A minor pentatonic scale using pattern 2. So if we find A on the bottom string, it's down here on the 5th fret, and then you should know that an octave shape is along 2 frets and up 2 strings. I've got a video all about notes on the neck, which I'll pop a link to in the cards if you're unfamiliar with these concepts. But our lowest root note in pattern 2 is going to be up here in the key of A on the 7th fret of the D string, because it's the octave of this note on the bottom string. So starting from that root note, we're going to have first finger on the root. Then the next note is going to be little finger 3 frets higher, playing the 10th fret. Then moving on to G string, we're going to have first finger playing the 7th fret again. Third finger playing the 9th fret. Now we're going to take that first and third finger pairing and move it up to the next string, but shift it up 1 fret. So now we're going to have first and third fingers on the 8th and 10th fret on the B string. And just using first and third fingers is a little bit more optimal for guitar techniques such as bends and hammer-ons and pull-offs and things, rather than trying to use second and little, which is really awkward. So we're just going to shift and use first and third instead, and then it's the same on the top string. So first finger on 8th fret and third finger on 10th fret. And then if we descend back down, we're going to go third, first, third, first, shift everything down a fret for the G string, third, first, and then remember it was little finger on D string, first finger on the root note on the 7th fret on D string. And then if we continue to descend down below the root note, we've got little finger again on A string, followed by first finger again. And then the bottom string is a little bit of an awkward one. We've got little finger playing the 10th fret, and then second finger playing the 8th fret. And that's as low as we go, and then we've got to climb back up to the root note. So we're going back to little finger on the 10th fret, first finger on 7th on A, little finger on 10th, and then resolving to first finger on 7th fret on that root note again. So it's one of them scale cycles where we go up, then down, then back up again to get back to the root note. And if I play the full cycle for you, we're going to be going first, little, first, third, shift up, first, third, first, third, and then back down, third, first, third, first, shift down, third, first, little, first, little, first, little, second, and then back up, little, first, little, first. So if I play it without talking, just so you can hear the sound of it, we'd have this as one full scale cycle. And that would be Minor Pentatonic Pattern 2. Now when it comes to actually using Pattern 2, the main focus is going to be on the top few strings, as most players will actually opt to slide down into Pattern 1 when descending the scale rather than navigate the more kind of awkward section at the bottom of Pattern 2. So rather than having this, you'll see a lot of this kind of thing. Now I'm going to do some videos about what's called the extended pentatonic and show a few of these techniques and linking patterns together, but for now I do think it's a good idea to learn Pattern 2 in its entirety, just to increase your depth of knowledge and avoid creating any limitations. Next, we're going to have a chat about the root notes and the intervals. We've already talked about the lowest root note, which in this key, the key of A, is going to be here on the 7th fret on the D string. The next root note is going to be up here on the 8th fret of the B string. So we've got this octave shape, which is slightly wider because of the tuning of the B string. And remember, we've got 5 notes in a pentatonic scale, so if we play up the 5 notes from the lowest root note, we'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the next note is the next root note. And then if we fill in the other intervals, obviously starting on this root note on the 7th fret D, that would be the root. Then we've got minor 3rd, perfect 4th, perfect 5th, minor 7th, there's that root note. Then on the top string we've got a minor 3rd and a perfect 4th. And then if we make our way back down to the low root note and go down from there, we've got the minor 7th, then the 5th, then the 4th, and then right at the bottom of the scale we've got the minor 3rd, which is actually the second lowest interval in the scale because there's no second involved. And it might feel at this point like you want to just skip down and end on that root note down there, but if you're sticking strictly to Pattern 2, you actually have to descend all the way down to that 3rd and then all the way up again to the root note. Obviously when you're playing actual music you can be creative and do whatever you want, but when you're practicing the scale it is helpful to land on that root note at the end, because it just solidifies the sound of the scale in your mind. Next, I want to talk about the finger options, and we'll deal with the bottom of the scale first. As I say, it's not used very often, the bottom of this scale, because most people will slide down into Pattern 1 instead. But if you are going to use the bottom of Pattern 2, we're starting here on the root note, descending through the A string. When we get to the bottom string, you can either go little finger on 10th fret and second finger on 8th fret, or we can go bring the 3rd finger in to play the 10th fret, do a little shift, and then first finger on 8th fret. Either of those options work fine. Just go with whatever's comfiest, and then as I've already mentioned, once you ascend the scale and you're moving from the G string to the B string, you want to be sticking with 1st and 3rd fingers rather than trying to incorporate 2nd and little, because it's just more awkward, and as I've said, you'll be able to do hammer-ons and pull-offs and bends a lot easier using those 1st and 3rd fingers on the top 2 strings. At this point, I also want to talk about a nice little box formed by the top 5 notes of Pattern 2, which a lot of my students will recognise as the house shape. So if we go from the top of the scale, we'd be going 10th fret, 8th fret, 10th fret, 8th fret, and then 9th fret on G. So you can see how that makes the shape of a house. Might help you remember the shape of this box. And basically this is a nice place to kind of hang around in when you're improvising, because it's super comfortable for the fingers and you'll probably find it quite easy to create licks and melodic ideas in this shape. If you're going any further than this house shape, you're probably going to want to bring the 3rd finger in, as we've already mentioned, but if you're sticking to this house shape for a bit, you're actually better off using 2nd finger on G string here, because then we don't have to throw in any more position changes to get back to the 1st and 3rd fingers on the top strings. So if you're sticking in that area, you can use middle finger. If you're descending further, you probably want to bring 3rd finger back in. So you've seen me use this in this way at the start of the lesson, and another nice thing to throw in is a slide with the 2nd finger to get into this box shape, because it sets up first and third fingers quite nicely on the top strings. Now let's take a look at string bends, and the absolute key bend in this one is a tone bend on the top string with third finger. So in this key we're going to be bending the 10th fret up to the sound of the 12th fret. So really useful bend this one. We're actually bending the 4th degree of the scale up to the 5th degree of the scale, so we're bending to a note that is present in the tonic chord, and that just makes it super usable in loads of different situations, and it pretty much tends to work the majority of the time. Now there are other bends in this pattern which aren't quite as ideal but still possible. The first one is if we do another tone bend on the B string, also on the 10th fret, so bending up to the sound of the 12th fret, that would sound like this. Now this one sounds okay, but maybe not as great as potential other bends, and the reason for that is because we're actually bending to the 2nd degree of the scale. But the 2nd degree, if you remember from the first lesson, is one of the ones that isn't involved in the pentatonic. We'd have to add the 2nd degree to the pentatonic to start creating a diatonic scale. So that's why it doesn't sound out of key, because it is technically in the key, but it's just not in the scale. If we do want to do a bend that's in the scale, we actually have to do a tone and a half bend, so bending up to the sound of the 13th fret, which feels like a big push, but it can be pretty cool. And you also get pretty clever players like Dave Gilmour who will incorporate both at once, so he'll play things like... So you're actually hearing this kind of 3-note melody just by changing the pitch mid-bend. And the other option for bends in this pattern is we can bend the 9th fret on the G string, but this one does have to be a tone and a half. So as I say, not as common or as ideal, those bends on the lower strings. The top string is the most common one, but they're still there if you want to use them. And now it's time to learn our pattern 2 lick, which is going to sound like this. Now I must admit, I pretty much stole this one from Chris Buck when I did my video about trying to play like him. Definitely check that out if you enjoy his playing. But I suppose a big part of developing your repertoire is kind of stealing ideas from players that you admire and developing them into your own playing. So we're going to use the little house shape, and we're going to start with that 2nd finger slide that I mentioned into the 9th fret. After this, it's going to be 1st finger, playing the 8th fret on the B string, followed by 3rd finger, hammering down the root note on the 10th fret, so that's the start of the lick. After this we're going back to 2nd finger on G string, then skipping up to 1st finger, playing 8th fret on high E. And it sounds quite nice to put a bit of vibrato on this note, just to add a bit of an accent to it. So that would be... And then to finish it off, we're playing the root note again with 3rd finger on B string, pulling off to 1st finger, and then finishing by picking the root note played by that 3rd finger on 10th fret B. So there's the whole lick. And one final time. And timing wise, it sounds pretty good to start on either beats 1 or 3. So if we're starting on beat 1, we'd have 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4. And if we start on beat 3, we'd have 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 1. So just go with whatever feels best in the particular context that you're playing it in. Remember, you can download the backing tracks just titled Groove in A on my Patreon page to help practice these licks. There's swung, feel and straight backing tracks in a variety of tempos, so they're just designed to help experiment with these sorts of things, so you can throw your licks in, play them over and over again and practice creating ideas. So I hope that's helped you get started with pattern 2 of the minor pentatonic scale. Now I'm going to mention this in every video, but I really think it's a bad idea to try and learn all 5 patterns at once. So take a couple of weeks just to focus on this pattern, really ingrain it, get it comfortable, learn to combine it with pattern 1, and when you can make music with it, then think about learning pattern 3. Remember, you can access the Minor Pentatonic scale series via the link in the description. I'm going to be doing some more videos soon about licks and combining patterns, so keep an eye out for those. The link to my Patreon page will be there as well, where you can download those extra resources to help with practice. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoy the lessons, and if you found this one helpful, I'd really appreciate you giving it a like, and I'll see you in the next one.